In October 1913, Henry Ford did something that changed civilization. He installed the world's first moving assembly line at his Highland Park plant in Michigan. Within a year, the time it took to build a Model T dropped from 12 hours to 93 minutes. Ford did not just build cars, he built the modern industrial world. He turned a luxury item into something a factory worker could afford, and in doing so, he created the American middle class. That was 112 years ago. Today, the company that literally invented mass production cannot figure out how to make money building cars. Ford's electric vehicle division, Model E, lost $5.1 billion in 2024 following a $4.7 billion loss the year before. Its warranty and recall costs hit $6 billion in 2024, up 22% from the year before, the highest of any major automaker. And in December 2025, Ford announced a $19.5 billion restructuring charge as it abandoned flagship electric vehicle projects it had spent years promising the world. The inventor of mass production forgot how to build things efficiently. The company that once moved a civilization forward is now scrambling to stop its own financial bleeding. And the question nobody in Detroit wants to answer is a simple one. How did this happen, and is there any road back? Let's start with the one product holding this entire empire together and why that should terrify you. For over 40 consecutive years, the Ford F-Series pickup truck has been the best-selling vehicle in the United States. Not just the best-selling truck, the best-selling vehicle, full stop. One top Wall Street analyst has estimated that Ford's F-Series pickup line is responsible for more than 3/4 of the company's total global profits, all by itself. One product line, keeping a $185 billion company solvent. On paper, that looks like dominance. In practice, it is a slow-motion risk that Ford's leadership has been reluctant to confront. Ford Pro generated $9 billion in adjusted EBIT in 2024, and Ford Blue contributed $5.3 billion. But Model E erased $5.1 billion of that in losses. The F-150 and its commercial cousins are essentially plugging a hole in a sinking ship. The moment that the plug loosens, the entire financial picture changes dramatically. There is another layer that almost nobody talks about. Ford held back shipments of its refreshed 2024 F-150 for most of the first quarter of the year to address quality issues before the trucks reached customers. Roughly 92% of the pickups built were F-150S. The company that depends more on one product than almost any manufacturer in the world was, at that critical moment, unable to ship that product because it could not guarantee it would work properly. The illusion was already cracking. But to understand how Ford got here, you have to go further back and reckon with the weight of its own crown. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes with being the best at something for a very long time. Ford had been the king of American roads for decades, and that success became a cage. When Tesla started building a direct-to-consumer model that bypassed the dealer network entirely, the reaction from legacy automakers was largely dismissive. Ford was building trucks, real trucks, for real Americans. What did software have to do with it? The answer, it turned out, was everything. The companies now eating Ford's lunch are not traditional automakers who outdesigned them. They are technology companies that happen to build cars, and they move with a speed and flexibility that Ford's century-old institutional architecture simply cannot match. Ford's supply chain involves hundreds of outside vendors. Its product development cycles run in years, not months. Its organizational layers, built over 120 years, are the opposite of agile. Ford's CEO Jim Farley has openly acknowledged that improving quality is the company's single largest near-term opportunity to lower costs. That admission, from the chief executive of one of the world's great automakers, tells you something important. It tells you that the most urgent financial problem is not competition from outside. It is Ford's inability to consistently deliver the thing it has been making for over a century. A car that works. Arrogance is expensive. Ford is paying the bill and it is only just getting started. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This story is just getting started, and the numbers ahead are far worse than what you have seen so far. In 2021, Ford's leadership looked at Tesla's soaring valuation and made a decision. The company announced it would invest $50 billion in electric vehicles by 2026. it restructured the entire company into 3 separate units: Ford Blue for gas and hybrid vehicles, Ford Pro for commercial customers, and Ford Model E, the new electric vehicle division, which was supposed to be the future. The split was framed as clarity. Separating the profitable present from the high-growth future would give the electric division room to move with startup speed. What nobody said loudly enough was that Model E was not operating with startup economics. It was carrying the full weight of a legacy manufacturer's cost structure, supply chain, and labour agreements, while trying to compete against companies that had built their operations from zero, with electric vehicles in mind from day one. The panic set in fast. By the time slowing EV sales growth became undeniable, Ford had delayed $12 billion in planned EV-related spending. The company that had committed $50 billion to the electric future was quietly pressing pause. The Model E division posted a $4.7 billion loss in 2023. In 2024, that loss widened to $5.07 billion, with the company projecting another $5 to $5.5 billion in losses for 2025. The rushed pivot had not caught the market. It had caught Ford itself. The most damning number in Ford's recent financial history is not a headline figure. It is a per-unit number that Ford's own earnings calls revealed, almost as if the company was daring investors to notice. In the first quarter of 2024, Ford's Model E division sold 10,000 vehicles and posted a $1.3 billion loss, working out to approximately $132,000 lost on every single vehicle it sold. Revenue from the division plunged 84% as price cuts spread across the industry. Let that number sit for a moment. A company charging roughly $50,000 for a Mustang Mach-E was losing more than twice the sale price on every transaction it completed. Ford explained that the losses included research and development costs for next-generation EVs. But that explanation, while partly true, obscures the core problem. Ford's CEO acknowledged on an earnings call that revenue was dropping faster than the company could reduce costs. That is not a timing issue. That is a structural problem. By the fourth quarter of 2024, the per-vehicle loss had narrowed to approximately $37,000. Over the full year, Model E generated $3.9 billion in revenue while losing $5.1 billion. For every dollar Ford earned from electric vehicles in 2024, it spent more than $2 to earn it. Something deeper is broken here, and it goes far beyond the cost of batteries. Every car company has warranty costs. That is part of the business. The question is always one of scale, and Ford's scale has become alarming. In 2023, Ford spent $4.8 billion fixing customer vehicles, a 15% increase from the previous year, setting aside $1,203 in warranty reserves for every single car it sold. By 2024, total warranty costs had surged 22% year over year to $6 billion, the highest of any major automaker, outpacing General Motors at $4.47 billion and Stellantis at $5.8 billion. In a single quarter, the second quarter of 2024, recall and warranty costs hit $2.3 billion, costing the company $25.5 million every day for 3 months, the federal government noticed. In 2024, Ford agreed to pay up to $165 million in civil penalties after a federal investigation found delays in recalling vehicles with defective rearview cameras. Ford also entered a 3-year consent order with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, requiring a review of all recalls from the past 3 years. Ford's own COO stated during an earnings call that improving quality is the single biggest driver to close our cost gap, but admitted it would take time to clear what he described as old issues. Ford led the industry in recalls since 2021, with 62 recalls in 2024 alone. That is not a reputation any company wants, and it tells you something about where the institutional attention had been directed while the electric pivot was burning money on the other side of the ledger. When Ford launched its Model E dealership certification program in late 2022, it asked its dealer network to make a choice. Dealers who wanted to sell electric vehicles had to invest between $500,000 and $1.2 million each in on-site charging infrastructure, facility upgrades, and advanced staff training. In return, they would be certified to sell the electric future of one of the most iconic brands in automotive history. By December 2022, Ford's CEO announced that 2/3 of the network had committed. That number felt like a mandate. It was not. Within a year, enrollment had dropped to just over 50% of the network, with roughly 1,550 Ford dealerships deciding they would not sell a single new all-electric Ford for 3 years. Lawsuits emerged, including a ruling in favor of an Illinois dealership group arguing that Ford's certification requirements violated state laws. In July 2024, facing sluggish demand, Ford reversed course entirely and allowed all dealers to sell electric vehicles, rendering the original certification program effectively meaningless. Some dealers who had spent up to $1 million upgrading their facilities felt burned by the reversal. Others were already refusing shipments of electric models to avoid sitting on unsold inventory. Ford had gone to war with the very network it depended on to reach customers. It had lost that war before the battle was even officially over. The relationship between the automaker and its dealers had cracked under the weight of a strategy that changed direction midstream. There was one more place the pressure was building, and it was the one Ford's competitors had quietly solved years earlier. When BYD builds an electric vehicle, it manufactures the batteries, the motors, the chips, and the core software in-house. When Tesla builds one in Texas, it controls the cells, the powertrain, the software stack, and the charging infrastructure. Both companies spent years designing their businesses around the principle that owning the entire production chain gives you control over cost and quality in ways that outside dependency simply cannot replicate. Ford built its business the opposite way. The company relies on a network of hundreds of external suppliers for components ranging from semiconductors to seats to battery cells. That model worked well for a century when the core technology was relatively stable and supply chains were predictable. The pandemic broke that assumption entirely. Chip shortages, logistics bottlenecks, and raw material inflation exposed exactly how fragile Ford's supply chain was when stress was applied. The battery problem is the most costly illustration. Ford entered a joint venture with SK On to build battery plants in Kentucky and Tennessee, under the name Blue Oval SK. By December 2025, Ford announced it was exiting the joint venture, taking a charge of approximately $3 billion in the process, and repurposing the Kentucky plants for stationary battery storage instead. Ford had spent billions trying to close the vertical integration gap. It ended up writing off the investment. The competitors had not just built a better car, they had built a better business from the ground up, and that is a gap you cannot close by simply spending more money. In December 2025, Ford's CEO Jim Farley stood before investors and said something that many in the industry had quietly known for months. He said it didn't make sense to keep ploughing billions into products that we knew would not make money. Coming from the leader of a company that had committed $50 billion to the electric future just 4 years earlier, that sentence was the official end of an era. Ford announced a $19.5 billion restructuring charge. 3 planned electric vehicles were cancelled outright. The F-150 Lightning, the electric version of America's best-selling truck, was converted into an extended-range hybrid and shifted to a different production facility. The massive Blue Oval City complex in Tennessee, originally designed to produce the next-generation electric F-150, was renamed and refocused on gas-powered truck production. The company's new target is that 50% of its global volume will consist of hybrids, extended-range EVs, and fully electric vehicles by 2030, up from 17% in 2025. But the path to that target still runs through the same gas-powered trucks that Ford has been selling since the 1970s. The $19.5 billion charge reflects the sunk costs of abandoned battery plants and vehicle designs that no longer aligned with a market that had grown increasingly price-sensitive. It is also the price Ford paid to discover that a century-old company cannot simply decide to become a technology company and make it so. The retreat was framed as strategic clarity. In reality, it was a very expensive lesson in the limits of institutional transformation. Ford is not dead, let's be precise about that. The F-Series pickup has sustained the company for over 4 decades, and every direct F-Series job supports an estimated 13 to 14 additional American jobs within local communities and dealerships. The company's 2024 revenue hit a record $185 billion. The lights are on. But the story of Ford's last 5 years is not a story about a bad quarter or an unlucky product cycle. It is a case study in what happens when an institution mistakes past dominance for future durability. Ford's leadership watched software-first competitors redefine automotive manufacturing and responded with a combination of denial, panic, and then retreat. It spent over $10 billion in EV losses before adjusting course. It spent $6 billion in a single year fixing quality problems it should not have had. It watched half its dealer network refuse to sell the products it was betting its future on. The broader lesson here extends far beyond the automotive industry. Every dominant company carries the weight of its own history as both an asset and a liability. The institutional muscle memory that built an empire can also prevent that empire from changing when the environment shifts. The companies that survive transitions are not always the biggest. They are the ones moving like they have something to prove rather than something to protect. Henry Ford built the world's first assembly line in 1913. Whether the company he left behind can survive its own refusal to reinvent that line at the speed the market now demands is the question that will define the next decade. And the clock, unlike Ford's famously efficient conveyor belt, does not stop moving. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what is really happening inside one of America's most iconic companies, subscribe now. Every week we go into the earnings reports, the footnotes, and the numbers that the mainstream press buries. This is where the real story lives.